Clem, thank you very much for coming in to join me today on Culture Corner. Really good to have you on the podcast. Looking forward to hearing about your experiences and insights. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Yeah, delighted to be here.
Brilliant. Obviously, we know each other stretching back a very long time. First at Infinity Works, reconnected recently on our new journeys, I suppose, for both of us. So for anybody that's listening that doesn't know you, if you can give a bit of a background of who you are, what you've done, what you're doing now, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, to briefly introduce myself, so Clem Pickering, obviously, as you know. I suppose I've come up through a technology career ultimately. So I worked for many years at Core Credit, which is now TransUnion, the credit reference agency in Leeds, and kind of worked my way up the engineering ladder to kind of take on ultimately a head of role. So I was head of software development for a while, head of architecture, head of testing. So I kind of worked my way around and really broadened out my experience of a kind of wide range of tech there. But then got an opportunity to join Infinity Works and worked in consultancy and also leadership roles there for a good number of years until last year, really, when I've gone independent. So I'm now an independent tech leadership coach. So really what I try and do is work with leaders at all different stages in their career, from people just starting out or maybe people moving into a more wider ranging role for the first time, right up to C-suite, to kind of help them increase their impact, figure out where they want to go next perhaps, and also be more people focused, more humane, more kind of compassionate as leaders as well, which is really my kind of passion, really.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. And I noticed obviously throughout your career you said you've led a lot of teams across different subsectors as well, and the testing, the architecture, you mentioned the dev. What took you into the coaching? Was your natural, and obviously there's lots of different styles of leadership, isn't it? Was your natural style on the more coaching aspect, and it was a simple or natural transition, to use the word again, to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely you're right on that. It is more my natural style. I've never been a particularly authoritarian command and control type of leader, I would say. So my natural style is to be curious and supportive and aim to kind of try and help people get the best out of things. So I guess I've been using aspects of coaching in my roles for many, many years. But I also had the opportunity to work with a coach myself at a number of roles. So back in Core Credit days, we got an opportunity to work with a personal coach, and then I've paid for my own coaching since then as well. And it's been fantastic. I really enjoy the process and can kind of see the value I've experienced the value it kind of brings. So a number of years ago now, I kind of got more passionate about that and decided to take some training myself to become an accredited coach. And then, trying to make it my full-time venture now. Fantastic.
It seems you were introduced to the coaching game a long time before me. I had an experience of it at the Bridge previously when I was one of the directors there. I paid on for a certain number of sessions. I found it really helpful. I think it's something I'll pick up again as we get going with Exalto. Found it very taxing.
Yes.
A lot more taxing than I thought it would. Essentially the power's on you to come up with the solutions, isn't it? And you're gently guided along the way. So fairly draining, but really enjoyable.
Very much, yeah. I think sometimes people they come to coaching kind of maybe thinking they're going to be told what to do. That this person's going to miraculously have all the answers and they're just going to list it out for them. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It's much more about helping you unlock the answers. So, like you say, it's taxing. It can be confusing, but ultimately, it kind of gets you out of your own head is what I say, and have somebody else kind of look at all your thoughts and help you with that is can be really powerful.
Definitely. I think somebody telling you what to do who's been there and done it, I suppose, would be more of a mentor.
Yes, exactly.
And they're completely opposites, aren't they?
Yeah, and sometimes, of course, there can be some real value in that. It's useful to hear what's worked for other people and to see what's possible for somebody who's kind of gone down the path you want to go down. But also, I guess, it's not necessarily going to work for you. You're not the same as that other person, different set of circumstances, different kind of outlook on things. So I often feel that mentoring is always needs to include an element of coaching as well for it to be genuinely kind of useful.
To make an impact.
Yes, exactly.
That's interesting. I think one thing I was going to ask, because obviously we're talking about the culture and leadership and what creates high performing teams. You coach senior leaders in tech. Do you find there's certain topics, obviously we're going to cover a few topics, but do you find there's certain topics that you're always asked about, or there's certain areas that are a common theme that people want support on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's kind of things that come up all the time, like imposter syndrome. I think everybody feels at some point in their career, and particularly as people move into more senior roles, should I really be here? Can I really do that? It's very natural. Another one's probably around kind of, showing vulnerability, that balance of the command and control, shall we say, or kind of trying to be directive, maybe is a better way of putting it, versus being supportive and kind of trying to encourage people and empower them, that kind of thing. So getting the balance right there is something that a lot of people are keen to look at. And then things like just tackling tough conversations, always difficult. Not that I've got the answers, but going through it and being able to talk about it can really help kind of prepare for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's good to give people a different perspective on things, isn't it? And that you'll have had multiple situations where you can say, or advice you can give, I did this and it worked, I did this and it didn't work, and I think it's helpful to get someone else's thoughts on that. Yeah,
very much. And I thinking it's sometimes just picking up on something that people say in terms of why they might be not looking forward to a particular conversation. What is it that's really worrying them about it, and just kind of highlighting that and then allowing a bit more focus on it can often allow them to kind of unlock how they actually now need to take it forward. So.
Brilliant. Before we get talking about culture, I wanted to ask you, I've been asking a few people now, how did you first start out in tech? Mm-hmm. How did you get into it? Was it a natural progression? Was it always something, had you been coding since you were a wee nipper, like some people, or was it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and one I'm always happy to kind of talk about, partly because I don't think I've followed a completely traditional route into tech myself. So I did do a little bit of coding as a kid, but nothing obsessive, just a little bit of messing about with BASIC at the time. But I went, I did a geography degree. So I was really kind of into, physical geography, glaciers and climatology and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so at that point, and I had no thought about going into tech, but after a year out after that, I ended up doing a master's in geographical information systems, so kind of computer mapping in its sort of simplest form. So that started to lead me into the tech industry in the late 90s. And then when I joined my first role, I was initially kind of doing an analyst role, but got really interested in the sort of software side of it, and got an opportunity to move into the software development team. And it was kind of creating things that really for me was the passion at that point in my career. I liked the idea of being able to bring something to life and create software from code was fantastic. So that's what led me into the career.
It's amazing, isn't it, how you pick things up along the way? So it was the introduction to GIS that flipped you into the tech scene.
Yeah, I mean, I liked maps, I liked geography, so I thought, I'll go and do a kind of computer mapping type degree. That sounds really interesting. And then there was some programming involved in that, and kind of creating software to analyse data, spatial data, and all that kind of thing. And then I thought, actually, it's the software bit that I find interesting, and it kind of led from there. So
you went from there.
Yeah, it's interesting how it works.
Yeah, definitely. There's no set route, is there? Really?
Definitely not.
If you've got that sort of growth mindset, or you've got that passion, and you follow a process, then you can almost achieve anything.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and I think, I know we're probably going to talk about the academy a bit later, but that was very much something we wanted to support through that, was allowing people those different routes in, and just to kind of find their passion at the point when it's right for them. Brilliant.
Well, we'll get stuck into it now. One of the things we want to talk about is building strong cultures.
Yep.
So what's you've worked at Infinity Works, we know that. From the outside, they look scale up growth organisation, flew through it without any hiccups is what it looks like, but they did really, really well. So and seem to have a really good culture. So what would you say is it makes a great culture? What is it? People talk about good culture. What would you envisage a good culture being?
Yeah, good question. But obviously one that's really difficult to answer in some ways, because there's so many factors that kind of feed into it. But I think for me, it's got to have people at the heart, which I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but ultimately any organisation, any culture is the people and how they interact. And how they interact is going to be kind of influenced by so many things: the leadership, the values, what the company's doing, who they've hired, their backgrounds. All of that will play a part. But I think for me, cultures that are, inclusive, psychologically safe, fun places to work, allow people to be themselves and bring their creativity and innovation. That to me is what a good culture looks like. I couldn't imagine working anywhere myself that was going to be very authoritarian, very kind of just do what I say, high stress, high pressure kind of thing. That wouldn't be for me, and that's not certainly how I think of a good culture.
Yeah, definitely. You wouldn't want to be in a business where they're just putting a round peg in a round hole and saying, right, that's you.
Yep. Yeah, definitely not. Yeah,
no. Yeah. So what was the culture like at Infinity Works? I imagine it was very much like that, and how did that evolve over time? Because we know it does evolve, doesn't it? Like you said, with every hire, was there a focus on making sure it didn't dip? Because a lot of people think, right, we're going to create a culture, and it's right, we'll start here, and that's it, and we never have to go back to it. But that's not the case, is it?
Definitely not. No, the word you use there, evolution, I think is probably key for me. No culture will stay the same forever. It's really probably just a moment in time for that group of people in that kind of context. But so at Infinity Works, it definitely evolved as the company grew, and there was kind of pros and cons to each stage of that, really. So certainly in the early days, it was just a small group of people working together, having fun, but in a pretty pressured kind of situation, trying to get the company up and running, tight deadlines, all that sort of thing. And as it evolved, we needed to kind of give it more thought, a little bit more structure, to be totally honest, and to kind of work out, I suppose, what the challenges were at each stage of that evolution, and then just kind of gently try and steer it in the right direction. So I don't think the culture was the same from any one year to the next, really. It constantly kept evolving, but that kind of focus on people being inclusive, being kind of giving people autonomy and kind of allowing them to be creative, I think is a thread that runs throughout.
Yeah, well, you stole one of my questions, because I was going to say, initially, did they have, because a lot of businesses you talk about setting up, what's our why, what values are we going to align ourselves with, and that we can live and breathe and reflect in the way that we operate. We looked at that when we set up Exalto. Because you were number 10 in, as you were saying before, so you're right at the start. Did the owners have that sort of the why and the values, or was it just a tight group of really good, well-respected mates or great techies, and we're like, right, we're going to do something now, and we'll just go on the fly a little bit to start with?
Very much the latter. So I don't think
they won't mind that.
They wouldn't mind me saying that. It was pretty much the vision initially, I think, was they wanted to have an A-team van and drive around companies, just a small group of people sorting things out for people. And definitely there was no sense of any kind of values or grandiose vision. In fact, quite the opposite. It was almost like we just need to keep getting stuff done. And actually, if anything, that was exactly the right vision to have at that point. So when you've got a small group of people, as long as those people kind of are all aligned on what the company is ultimately kind of trying to do, which we were, then a lot of that sort of more conscious kind of thought on values and that sort of thing, I think that can kind of come later when it does become a lot more important.
Yeah, definitely. Because I suppose you can get lost, can't you, thinking about, right, okay, we need the values, we need the X and Y, but actually you need some money. You actually, it's a fine balance, isn't it? Right, we need to go out there, we need to win the business, we need to deliver, we need to make sure there's revenue coming in, and also we need to try and get the company off on the right angle.
Yeah, definitely. I think, one thing Infinity Works just did really well was putting clients first and delivering on hard problems. And that focus on doing that didn't really require a vision statement or values initially. It just required people really committing to doing that and just focusing on doing what was right for the clients. And that kind of didn't distract from that purpose initially.
Yeah. Which is, it actually probably falls hand in hand, doesn't it? Because if you're pre-wired to do, we're going to solve customers' problems, we're going to leave them with a great experience, we're going to do it in a fantastic manner, it almost washes through that you, as a team, you're going to have strong values anyway that you all align to. So
yeah, I think it's and the values are kind of there in terms of how people act and interact. And how they behave, and I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be made explicit to start with, but once a group gets larger in size, I think that's when it becomes like really key to kind of do that.
Changes that. One of the things that we talked about, obviously you hear the importance of psychological safety, you know, people where they can bring the true selves to work, and almost like the foundation of the high performing teams. How important is that in creating high performing teams, and how did you or Infinity Works or Core Credit as they were within your teams, how did you create that psychological safety? How did you create that trust and belonging? And
I mean, I think, to be totally honest, it's at the time I don't think I'd come across the term, but then when I look back with hindsight, to kind of certainly my time at Core Credit, and then also, when I joined Infinity Works in 2015, we had been doing things that absolutely kind of nurtured that and kind of fostered it. And a lot of it is really just trying to help people feel safe to speak up, and doing so by being open, transparent, valuing people's voices. We talked a lot about low hierarchy in the early days of Infinity Works. So yeah, there was no sense that anybody was kind of you couldn't kind of go and have a conversation, you couldn't ask them a question. So that openness and transparency, I think, allowed everybody to kind of feel like, actually, this is expected. We're all expected to kind of put forward ideas and suggestions and questions and kind of highlight stuff that we don't think is working well. And that is the kind of underpinning, really. That is what psychological safety is about, having that culture that allows you to do that.
Yeah. And did you find, was it the founders very much, I suppose yourself and the founders, did you share bringing down barriers with you showed vulnerability? I suppose that's a big piece, isn't it? So I know a lot of leaders are like, how do you do that? I'm not comfortable with that. But that is a big thing. If you want people to open up and have a voice and communicate with you, then that's key. Yeah,
very much. I mean, that's something I do very much believe in. And I've had some interesting discussions over the years with people that, kind of think, no, our role is to kind of be really confident as leaders and sort of show this is what we're doing. But actually, I think that can backfire, because it kind of creates this kind of illusion of perfection and the fact that they're sort of maybe in charge and everybody else needs to be sort of subservient. By showing vulnerability, by actually kind of saying, you know what, that's a really good point, I hadn't thought of that, or I don't know, I've got no idea, that's a really tough question, I'm going to struggle to answer that. Those kinds of things can really, show that you are human, you're thinking in a very similar way to everybody else, as I'm sure we all are as humans. And that, again, it engenders that kind of safety in doing so.
Yeah, the I don't have the answer is very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. And talking about how you're feeling, how things are affecting you. Talking about imposter syndrome, for example, as well. It basically, if you're in a position of leadership, it allows other people to think, oh, actually, maybe it is okay for me to feel that too, and maybe it's okay to talk about it, and maybe it's okay then to work through it collaboratively with other people. And it kind of being vulnerable and starting from that point as a leader, I think unlocks a load of those things.
Imposter syndrome is something that's interesting. I've never had anybody talk about it on the podcast previously. So, I mean, it becomes, is it when someone's not confident in their own abilities, wondering why am I good enough to be in this position? And do you have to overcome that in order to create high performing teams or to be a good leader?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think affects lots of different people, and I don't actually personally think it's something that's completely possible to kind of overcome. To pick up on your kind of phrasing there, but it is something that you can kind of learn to kind of manage and settle. So it stems from that feeling of kind of feeling like a fraud, sort of not feeling like you are good enough or deserve to be in a particular position, that you've maybe got there through luck or just by being nice or being in the right place at the right time, all of those kind of things. And because of that, you've got this kind of persistent fear of you're going to be found out. Somebody's going to actually point out that you're a fraud and that you don't know anything of what you're doing. So I think, again, by being open about that as a leader, by talking about it and just acknowledging that it's something that lots of people will experience and kind of helping them with ways to deal with that, again, can kind of help people work through it and kind of be much more settled with that it's a natural part of life, really.
Right. So really it's the breaking down barriers, making it almost commonplace or acceptable to feel like that is the way to...
Yes, and again, I suppose with a coaching hat on, there are a number of different techniques you can use to sort of help somebody work through that. It's often about how they think about competence, and there's often sort of slightly flawed ways that they might be thinking about things. So like, and everything has to be perfect is a very common one. Unless it's perfect, I've not done my job right, I must be a fraud, I must be terrible at it, for example. And actually helping people actually reframe that slightly, try and question it, really. Is that true? Does it have to be perfect? Isn't there actually some value in learning and improvement and that kind of thing? What indeed is perfection? All those kind of things can help people actually start to reframe that.
Yeah. I heard a good phrase, better done than not, or
perfect is the enemy of good is the one I would bring out there. Yeah, very much. I think perfectionists or perfectionism can cause things to be delayed. It can cause things to be gold-plated, unnecessarily kind of overworked, all that kind of thing. Good enough is often good enough.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask you, we were talking about the psychological safety. So you're creating as a leader the vulnerability, which obviously brings down the barriers. It makes people, you're building up that trust, aren't you? I think, would you say everything more or less loops back to trust? Because that's where the foundations of the team, if the people can't trust you, then you're not getting anywhere, are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is key, but it's interesting because it's such a broad term. So I often think about things like psychological safety and vulnerability sort of being another level of detail on what actually kind of builds trust. So trust between two individuals is kind of one thing based on their relationship, but then when you think about trust at a wider level, it's often also about the environment, and that's where psychological safety kind of comes in. So the system in which people are working in, the environment that they're part of, is kind of wider than just trust as a sort of individual concept. And I think that's where looking at things like psychological safety, different leadership styles, kind of autonomy, mastery, purpose, all of those kind of things can help form the basis of a culture that does have trust as part of it, but also is kind of a whole load of other things as well. Right.
It's a wraparound. It's not just one.
Yes,
one singular.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. What's the we're talking about vulnerability again, but it comes down to the communication. How important as a leader of your experience? How important is sort of transparency? I've heard a lot of managers talk about the umbrella. So like you're there to protect your team from the stuff above, but equally I've heard a few people talk about the heat shield. So you actually, it's not healthy to protect the team fully from what's going on, so that they can, if they get to at least know and you're transparent, then they can do their jobs better. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a sort of binary answer, really. I think it's not one or the other. It's about getting the balance right. So one thing I think sometimes that leaders get wrong or organizations get wrong is kind of being closed by default. And by that, I mean kind of keeping everything's hidden unless people need to know. So they're only told on a need to know basis kind of thing. I like to kind of flip that round and think about, let's be open by default. So let's be open and transparent and share whatever we feel we can share, and only kind of lock down the stuff that really can't be talked about. And there's always going to be some stuff that's not appropriate for absolutely everybody to know about, and it has to be kind of kept a little bit more protected. But that's a much smaller amount of information, I would say, than most people might think.
Yeah.
And I think if you're trying to protect the teams and shield them, then obviously there'll be some things that fall into that category. The more you can handle that, then that won't impact on the teams. But equally, by being open, by actually bringing them into more of that, you're starting to empower people to come up with their ideas and ways of dealing with it, get suggestions from them again in that sort of, to help you out, and ultimately giving them opportunity perhaps to tackle things and take on things that otherwise they might have not had the chance to if they were completely shielded.
Yeah, definitely. And it allows people to buy it. People feel more empowered, don't they? You're giving them that information, you feel more trusted and empowered, and I suppose it gets them to buy it, bought in more, really. Yeah, definitely.
And I think if I think about the opportunities I've had in my career to take on new roles or tackle particular challenges, if I'd have been just treated as a team member and shielded from those opportunities, then I probably wouldn't have been able to kind of grow and develop in the different ways I wanted to. So I think, again, the more you can be open and share and think, well, why shouldn't I be able to do that as a leader? I think it's the right kind of approach for me.
Okay, perfect. We were talking before about obviously the start of Infinity Works, and a good group of really clever and techies all working hard together. As the business evolved, were there certain stages that you went through and you hit that resulted in you having to pivot or change what you're doing, or if I suppose again evolve, and when were they?
Yeah, I mean, definitely is the answer to that. But I often think it was more sort of with hindsight rather than necessarily as a conscious thought at the time. So when I look back now, I can see particular kind of points where you think, okay, that was a new stage where we had to adapt. As it actually going through it, it was more like the sort of last responsible moment kind of principle. So realizing that, hang on, what was working now isn't working. We need to adapt, we need to change, we need to evolve. That was a kind of more of an organic thing that happened as it grew.
Yeah.
And to pick up on, I suppose, a few key points, I suppose probably going to get the figures not quite right, but I would say around maybe 30 people or so was an initial sort of thing of, hang on, this isn't quite, we can't just have no structure and no kind of, no kind of communication, no sort of actual structure at that point. So bringing in, at that point we brought in a little bit of, not line management, because it was explicitly not that, but support for people. So having the more senior folks support other people, I think was introduced around 30 to 40 people through a scheme we kind of called Advocacy. And then probably when we started to get to around 100 people again, there's another point there about, okay, we probably need some more thorough policies and kind of processes for things. Just saying to everybody, just take whatever holiday you want, just didn't, obviously there was a real people struggled with that when it got bigger. It was really difficult. You were left feeling uncertain and unclear, and actually what was needed was more structure at that kind of point. So bringing in a kind of people operations team, starting to think about some process around things, having some kind of expectations as to regular events and ceremonies that the company would be doing, was sort of necessary at that point.
It makes sense, because I've heard there's some companies that go down their unlimited holidays route. But I've also heard that just causes people no end of problems, because they're like, well, can I take it? Can't I take it? When can I take it? It's like people like to, I know I do, like to work within parameters and actually know where I stand.
Yeah, totally. And I think, when I first heard about companies doing that unlimited holiday thing, I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. We should totally do that. But then having experienced a little bit of it in early days Infinity Works, you're absolutely right. The lack of clarity actually, I think, shows that people in those organisations don't even take as much holiday, because they don't feel like whether they don't know if they're allowed to or not. And I have heard that some of the more switched on companies kind of evolved it to a minimum holiday. So you must take 30 days holiday, and you can take more if you want, but you must take 30, which seems a bit more switched on to me. But I think you're right. The clarity is something that people crave, and I think we found that with things like opportunity for career reviews, knowing who to turn to on the account if something was going wrong. Having that clarity actually brought a load of benefit.
Yeah, definitely. I know in one of my previous roles, we said, right, you've got a nominal target for your sales.
Yep.
And at the end of the year, we'll have a review, pay review, but there'll be no real target for it. You'll just come in and have a discussion, and then the owners will make a decision as to whether you get a pay rise and that kind of thing. And when I first joined, I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. It's like dead chilled out, but actually it causes more problems because you get to the end and you're like, right, can I have a pay rise?
Yep.
No, you can't. Why not? Because we've decided that you can't, or yes, you can because we've decided that you can. But there's nothing there for you to structure that around or to build a case on. And I found now that we're in the position that we're in, trying to grow a business, we're thinking you need a lot more structure. You need people to understand with absolute clarity. It's like what is required for you to get from A to B or to achieve X. Mm-hmm. You need to do Y. So yeah, that was one of my experiences. Yeah,
and I think you're making me think again of psychological safety and having a framework to help you know what to speak up about. What questions to help you be able to find the voice to ask a question about. Well, hang on, I've met my target. Does that not mean I can ask for a pay rise at this point? That it provides that framework to do that. If it's not there, then you're just left uncertain as to how and when to speak up often. So. Yeah,
definitely. And I started to, the more reading I've done on podcasts I've listened to and people such as yourself I've spoken to, the regular sort of interactions, so quarterly catch-ups or weekly catch-ups, so that actually once you get to an end of year review, it's not the be-all and end-all, and there shouldn't be anything in that review that is a surprise because you've interacted all the way through and you've provided feedback and you've made the necessary alterations or corrections or learned and developed as you go, rather than the old-fashioned way where you go, right, that's it, you get one chance to sit down and this is where it's going to be.
Well, yeah, don't get me started on annual reviews. I mean, I think there's so much wrong with that, but you've highlighted there, I think the way to mitigate it is not to just get rid of them and have no reviews whatsoever. People appreciate the benefits of those conversations, but to do it much more frequently, to make it closer to where they're actually working, so with somebody who actually knows what they're doing, all of that sort of thing starts to build in a much better sort of feedback culture than an annual review with somebody who might not even you might not even see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I've heard some horror stories with regards to that. Yeah, definitely. What you mentioned advocacy before. I know when we met for coffee, you touched on this. Can you explain a little bit more about that and how that worked and the benefits of it?
Yeah, I mean, so initially it was in response to a kind of that sort of feeling that we needed some more structure and we needed to provide some more support as the company grew, but without wanting to kind of go down a route of too much line management, too much hierarchy, starting to just build in layers and layers of hierarchy. As traditional wisdom might suggest you do, we were looking to sort of say, well, is there another way? Is there a way to provide some support for people without losing a lot of the benefits of the kind of autonomy and empowerment that we could see were a key part of the company? So advocacy was the idea that everybody would have somebody else who would be there to support them, not necessarily who would be much more senior to them, although we did find out it was a bit weird if it was the other way around, as in somebody who was much more junior. But they were definitely not hierarchically in charge of you. So you weren't reporting to them, they weren't your manager, they didn't have kind of, pay or hiring and firing kind of responsibility over you or anything like that. They were just somebody else who was going to be there to provide some support, possibly coaching, mentoring, that kind of thing. Yeah, to almost act as that sounding board and kind of be able to guide you a little bit in certain situations. And initially, for quite a period of Infinity's history, it worked really well. I think it got to another point in the growth of the company where it did start to creak a bit, and we realised, okay, well, maybe we actually do need some more hierarchy and clarity at that point. But for quite a chunk of time, it was a really fundamental part of how the company worked.
So it worked for you. Were obviously evolving as the company grew.
Yep.
You were agile enough. You were evolving. You say, right, advocacy works now, but we need something a bit more formal going down.
Yes, and I think a part of the reason for that was, as you know, just anything done at scale, you're going to get more variance in it. So we sort of found that not everybody who was taking on the role of advocate necessarily did it with the same enthusiasm, shall we say. So it wasn't necessarily working for some people.
Right.
Maybe people were paired up with people that they didn't want to sort of say, oh, it's not working, they weren't sure how to do that. So we went through a series of different evolutions of it, but ultimately we kind of ended up with certain people being, right, okay, you're really good at this, so we want you to continue to do that, and you will look after this group of people, so a little bit more hierarchical. And then other people being a lot, it was just more part of a sort of support network or communities of practice and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's great, and I like the sound of that, and it's obviously you've got a really good culture where people can feed back to you and say that this isn't working, or I'd like that to change, and it shows how successful IW was internally as within the environment that you created, because you can only evolve if people are providing you with feedback, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
And which leads me on to feedback. I know you've done a number of talks on this, so you'll be able to give us plenty of insight into it. But it's one of the things that I'm terrible with it. Because they can. I think it's a mindset. They can be difficult conversations, can't they? And a lot of people shy away from it, and I have to hold my hand up and say, it's a hurdle for me to get over. I was talking to somebody the other week who they referenced the being nice versus being kind process. Mm-hmm. So being nice to somebody, you'll just sort of gloss over it because you don't want to hurt their feelings, or be kind, giving somebody the opportunity to develop and evolve and give them constructive feedback so that they can move on.
Yeah, definitely. And you're absolutely right. They're tough conversations, and I think there's a number of reasons for that, because they do trigger a kind of really emotive response. It's that kind of fight, flight, or freeze thing. Receiving feedback when you're not expecting it, particularly if it's kind of constructive or something to do with improvement, often does not land particularly well. And of course the person giving it knows that as well, which is why I think people sort of shy away from it and kind of fear it a little bit. Actually, an interesting thing that I was reflecting on recently, though, is that thing that feedback can be positive, and actually taking the time to say, this was amazing and this is why, and focusing in on that detail, that kind of positive feedback to help people grow and kind of develop on what they're doing well. Is equally important, and that should be a much larger proportion of feedback that's given compared to this constructive stuff, as it were. I think people just, for whatever reason, they don't do that either. They just maybe say, "Oh, good job," and leave it at that, rather than actually honing in on what it is you're doing really well.
Yeah, I heard that recently. It's more powerful if Clem actually notices something that Adrian's done, and he can specifically say, that was really good when you did X, you know, and it's more targeted, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Just sort of saying, obviously saying thank you is a great thing, and saying, well done is also good. But it doesn't really give you anything to kind of then take forward and think, oh yeah, it was that thing that was particularly valuable in that, maybe that's a strength of mine and I should build on it and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Do you have any strategies, or when you were managing, did you have any strategies for giving feedback? Did it, you hear you receive an email saying, can I have a word in 20 minutes, and there's nothing else in the email, and you're just like sweating about what it's
totally. I mean, and again, it's a subject I've talked on quite a bit recently as well, but for a start, not doing that. If you're gonna have a conversation with somebody about feedback, sort of actually letting them know that you'd like to have that conversation, this is what it's going to be about, is now a good time, or should we find some time outside of that? I would sort of say is a good way to start. But then being very mindful of how you're going to deliver it, particularly if it's constructive, keeping it specific, keeping it detailed, separating the kind of emotions from the facts. So you're not kind of saying to somebody, you're terrible. You're kind of saying, well, I observed these particular things, and here's what I personally took from that. This is my assumptions. This is the impact it's had on me. What are your thoughts? Opening it up to a kind of two-way conversation. And there's a number of different kind of techniques that I've referenced. The feedback wrap I've talked about for years has been as a good way of giving feedback. And recently a model called See, Think, Feel, that's how I remember it, which is kind of based on sharing, again, facts, intention, impact, to make it kind of clear to the other person what you're trying to get across.
Right. So that's, as in, see, you've witnessed something, and then,
So what I saw was this. What I'm assuming is this. You're kind of sharing the fact that you're flawed as a human. You're taking something from that. Then the impact that had on me was, and you kind of then sharing your feelings and your emotions about it. And then finally, my intention in sharing this with you is, and then you're able to kind of actually share, well, why is it valuable to you? Why are you sharing it with the other person at all? But doing that as a kind of two-way conversation as well.
I listened to a blink of Radical Candor. Is it Kim Scott?
Yes, Kim Scott,
I think the axis, it's care personally, challenge directly. But you need to have sort of that high trust in order for that to be successful.
I mean, it's a great book, and definitely one I recommend people read and have a look at. I think it's, unfortunately, and I don't think this certainly wasn't Kim Scott's intention, it's kind of been weaponized. People have literally read the title and think, oh, brilliant, I can just be totally candid, just be brutal with feedback to people, and that's what's expected. And actually, when you read it, it's not that at all. Compassionate candor, I read recently, is what she wished she'd called it. So very much to your point about nice versus kind, you're not holding back. You're not sort of saying, if somebody's doing something that might be detrimental to themselves or somebody else, you aren't shying away from sharing that with them and having that honest conversation, but you're doing so in a way that is compassionate and is going to help that message land, and that you're kind of open to discussing rather than just delivering it like it's gospel kind of thing. You're right, it has been weaponized, because people just think, I can just steamroll into this. No compassion, no real thought. It's just like, this is tell it like it is. They need to hear it.
Exactly and the rest goes out the window.
Well, the reality is, I think, unfortunately, if people do that, often it does just go out the window, because that person it triggers defense mechanisms. They're either going to get angry, they're going to shut down, they're going to get upset. They're not going to get the message, and they're not going to necessarily actually think, okay, maybe I should have a think about that. Maybe I should actually see if I can find out something else to kind of corroborate that and, give it some thought. They're just going to dismiss it if it's too brutally delivered, in my view.
And the easy one to fall into, I think, is it ruinous empathy?
I think that's where your niceness kind of comes back in. I really don't want to hurt your feelings, so I'm just gonna give you some kind of nice platitudes and then leg it as quick as I can.
Everything's okay, don't worry.
Everything's fine.
But I think you won't be able to take it to that next level as a leader, will you? If you sit in that area.
No, exactly. I think and everybody kind of on the Kim Scott the Kim Scott quadrant of radical candor, kind of, you find yourself at different points in different boxes, but it's being mindful that, okay, hang on, I feel like I'm probably being too nice here. Maybe I do need to be kind and actually share something a little bit more challenging with the person. But at other times, maybe you're reading the situation and thinking, right, okay, I'm not sure what they need right now is that. I'm going to focus on some positives, and I'm going to really kind of try and help them feel more confident by focusing on the things that they're doing really well. Having that sort of emotional intelligence to kind of know where you are and adapt, I think, is a key skill.
Knowing your strengths and weaknesses, your frailties. How you react to other people as well. It's a big one. I know James, our MD, you know him well. He always says, can I provide you with a bit of feedback? That's his opening gambit, which straight away is like, right, okay.
It's a kind of a micro buy-in. There's a great YouTube video from Leanne Reniger, I think is the person. We can provide a reference, I'm sure. She talks about a micro buy-in, a micro yes. So you're giving people the opportunity to say, oh, actually not right now, I'm right in the middle of writing a big email.
Yeah.
Or to say yes. And often, once you've got that permission and you've set the scene, then it's going to be a feedback conversation. It's much more likely to go effectively.
It makes the conversation easier.
Yeah.
Do you think the word psychological safety, and because it's out there in the open a lot, isn't it now? A lot of people using it. Do you think that's been weaponized as well, where there's this perception that psychological safety, it's all happy clappy, everything's fine, and we're not going to fall out, and that's everyone's just got to be happy and there's no conflict.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think unfortunately, it has become, in some cases anyway, I've seen articles where people talk about, is it too psychologically safe, or it seems to be conflated with niceness and just being happy clappy, or maybe it's wellness initiatives and that sort of thing. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the same thing as psychological safety. Actually, psychological safety can make it quite uncomfortable at times, because really what you're trying to encourage people to do is feel safe to raise things, to have different views, to call things out. I'm concerned about this, I have a different view to you. So an environment of where actually psychologically safe, there can be some conflicts. Conflicts with respect though, so not people trying to tear lumps off each other, but actually not feeling afraid to hold different views and to debate things openly. So very different from a nice environment, I suppose you might say.
So you're thinking like more constructive, an element of constructive conflict, really.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So niceness again might be, we need to shut this down, people are disagreeing, let's quickly get rid of that and just kind of all agree that we're going to do this one way. Actually, that might not lead to the best outcomes. We need to surface that kind of difference of opinions, different views, give everybody a chance to kind of feed into that. But we don't need to go and do that in a way that's like, full on, not conflict, which is also might be bordering on aggression or nastiness or anything like that.
Yeah.
Doing so respectfully or constructively, I think it is a really valuable thing to do.
Because you need that conflict in order to innovate, I suppose, don't you? With the diversity of opinion. I suppose diversity of opinion, or diversity full stop, tends to result in constructive conflict. Is that?
I think, as long as psychological safety is in place. Because if it's not, and people don't feel safe to kind of speak up and share those views, then you're either just going to be left with sort of apathy, where everybody's kind of feeling like, it's just no point, I can't actually speak up. Or if it's not there, maybe the loudest voices always get heard, and the other ones are just kind of left disillusioned and left out, which is not an inclusive kind of environment. No. How do you deal with conflict? How have you must have had to, do you have a tactic or to stop it from getting out of hand? So you must have experienced some practice. I mean, it's difficult. Personally, I'm not somebody that likes conflict. I find it challenging. It's not me, but I think in a work context, maybe it's about I would probably sort of try and pause, get everybody just to kind of pause for a minute. So that might require an interjection and sort of say, look, hang on, things are maybe getting a little bit heated. Let's maybe just, get a drink and then we'll reset.
Yeah.
But then let's surface those views. Doing so in different ways, like, for example, giving everybody a turn to speak, for example, I'm quite a fan of. So we're literally going to go around the group and everybody's going to get a chance to speak for as long as they want on their particular thing. Nobody else is allowed to interrupt. Getting everything out on the table, actually you learn a load of stuff that you might have jumped in on before they had a chance to elaborate. Everybody gets to hear everybody's views. Good old post-its as well often is a nice way of doing it, so getting different views, putting them up, having them there visually as an opportunity to then focus discussions are probably kind of some of my go-tos to sort of deal with those situations.
So people will write their concerns on a post-it up on the wall, and then you'd work through those, would you?
Yes.
That's a good idea. I've never heard of that before.
I think, again, healthy conflict, healthy debate, for me, involves making sure everybody's voice is heard.
Yeah.
And And not everybody is going to agree, but actually making sure everybody feels like they have had a chance to speak. They understand the reasoning why actually if a decision needs to be made for one particular route, why that decision has been made, even if they're not totally happy with it. That to me is constructive kind of conflict and debate. If it's just being railroaded by the loudest person, that's not great. And actually sometimes if it's aggression wins out, or just the loudest voice, that there's a real danger of that kind of happening, and the quieter voice is not actually having had a chance to contribute.
Yeah, getting heard. I was just thinking, we talked about feedback before, one of your key subjects. In the as a team leader and in the businesses you've worked for, how have you gathered feedback from the teams? Mm-hmm. I've heard of employee net promoters, drop boxes, emails or discreet emails. That's has there anything worked well, not worked?
That's a good question. I think how I'd answer that is, you can't just rely on one thing. So you need to provide a range of mechanisms, really, because if you just provide one way, you're going to stifle some voices and lose some information. So we at Infinity Works, there was a range of those things we used. So we did do a kind of employee engagement thing. There was a tool people would kind of complete regularly to kind of say how they were feeling. There was also some qualitative stuff with that though, so you could provide some comments. So that tool at scale provided a kind of backdrop, but the key thing for me was it was not the only thing. There was also forums where an improvement forum type thing where people could come and share their views. There'd be Q&As with leaders, which were genuinely Q&As. You were actually saying, just ask anything and we're going to talk through it.
That's brilliant.
Conversations again through advocacy, or just leaders going and chatting with people, making sure they're available, making sure they're up for having conversation. That stuff's equally important. I think there's a danger when a tool gets brought in, then everybody just focuses on the tool and everything else gets forgotten.
Right.
For me, it's that combination of approaches which is really key if you really want to kind of surface what people are feeling and what they want to feedback.
I like that, because I've heard about all hands meetings, which I imagine that was what you're referencing with the leaders. And
yes.
But again, you need to have created that environment that allows people to have the voice, isn't it? Or people feel comfortable raising things. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, and all hands, I suppose. Yeah, it's one of those terms where for some people, I'm sure that'll be instantly, they'll be going, "Oh my God, they're nightmare." Other people have had good experiences. So you're right. It's how you do it to allow everybody's voices to be heard, and again, make it safe for people to discuss things is quite key. Group size, I think, is quite important. So in a room of 100 people, lots of people are not going to want to put their hand up and say, I really think this thing is broken. Having sort of smaller forums to do that, or again, those mechanisms that allow you to kind of submit it in a written form or in a different form, really kind of helps.
Okay.
And it's got to be also accompanied by that genuine transparency and vulnerability and empathy from the leaders, and not just shutting stuff down, because again, that for me kind of is where it backfires.
Because if you're asking for that feedback and you go into the lens of receiving that feedback, you need to be very careful of your reaction when you receive it, don't you, as well? Otherwise people will never feed back to you, whether that's individually, one-to-one, or within groups. And also you need to action. All right, you might not be able to action all of it, within the parameters of the business, but you need to at least action some of it, don't you?
Yeah, very much, yeah. Exactly. If you're asking for suggestions, but you've got no, no actual intention to implement any of it, then why are you asking for suggestions, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you're genuinely asking for suggestions and you're genuinely looking for ideas and how we can improve, how we can do things, then of course, you need to implement some of them. And importantly, for the ones that you don't, I think it's really important to be very clear, very curious as well about why it is you can't implement the others. So find out why they were putting that suggestion forward, what's really the kind of thing, explain why it's not going to be possible to implement it, again, that transparency is going to, people are going to feel valued, that, okay, they didn't just shut it down.
Yeah.
We actually did really talk about it, and I can understand now, okay, maybe that's going to be a challenge, or that isn't. And then they're going to be more likely to speak up again in future.
That's a very good point. So not only actioning stuff you can action, but dealing with the queries that you can't, and giving a response to it.
Yeah, and saying thank you for, whatever that suggestion is, even if you just don't think it's a good suggestion. Doesn't, by saying thank you as the first step, for me, is really important.
Yeah.
That person's taken the time to suggest it. Thank you for doing so. Then you can have that open conversation as to why or why not it's going to be possible to implement.
Brilliant. I know I'm bending your ear, so not many.
No, you're all right.
Not many more things to cover.
Kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah. I was thinking about, as the business grew, thinking from us, but Infinity Works, as it grew, how did you continue to communicate, or how did you change your channels of communication as you grew? And also, I suppose your collaboration in tech projects, I imagine, is very, very important. So how did you adapt your ways of working in collaboration around?
Yeah, on your communication point, I think for me it's about, certainly at scale, but probably at any size, but really as you grow, recognizing that you need to use lots of different channels. So it's not just like a one and done. We sent the email, everybody's got it. The chances are some people don't ever check their emails. Some people don't read their emails.
Yeah.
Some people have read it but then forgot it. Which is all fine. It's just different people will absorb information in different ways. So taking an approach of communicating via lots of different channels, following up to check if people have kind of understood, whether they've got more questions. It's got to be a kind of multifaceted kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
And I think again we were reasonably good at that. Not perfect, I wouldn't say, but there was multiple mechanisms used to kind of convey information. Lots of opportunities for people to ask questions, to check back in,
right?
To find out about that.
Okay. Was that sort of mainly emails, Slack channels?
Yeah, So email, Slack, doing kind of actual live events. Right. So like. Either these days in the remote world are kind of on a call, maybe recording it, sending the recording afterwards.
That's a good idea.
Possibly putting it on some sort of, wiki or intranet or whatever it is, so you've got that information. Yeah, and also remembering that not everybody will be there, or some people will join the company after that point. So how are they going to get that same information? That's equally important to think about.
That is important, definitely. Last couple of things. The hiring process. We'll go on to talk about the academy, because there's a bit more detail probably around that.
Yeah.
But when you were looking to hire, was there a big focus on trying to hire people with a growth? Were you looking at people with a growth mindset? I've been listening to a few podcasts recently. I think it's Carol Dweck. About, she looks obviously at a lot of growth mindset, fixed mindsets.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of podcasts with people saying we're trying to hire with people based on a growth mindset, so they're coming in and constantly evolving. Was that something that you looked at within your teams, or wanted to try and achieve in your teams?
Yeah, I think looking back, I think how we approached hiring probably did change over time at Infinity Works. In the early days, I think it was very much in that kind of, you were using the networks of the people that work there. Who else do you know who's good? How do we get them to come and work for us as well? Yeah. So there was definitely a kind of just hiring who we knew and people in that sort of who came with a good reputation. But there's definite downsides to that. You're kind of hiring taken to extreme, a whole bunch of clones, a whole load of people who think the same, work the same. Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of those things that as you scale, you start to now have to give it some more conscious thought.
Yeah.
So we did sort of start to do things like switch to more, trying to hire against the values. So are people aligned with the values rather than just being liked by the interviewers? What are they going to bring? What's the addition they're going to bring to Infinity Works, rather than just, is it more of the same? Yeah, I'm trying to think what are the kind of key things we try to focus on. Having diverse interview panels as well, so you're not just always being met by two blokes who are engineers. Actually, are we able to put across to have more of a diverse panel to make people feel more included, more welcomed when they kind of come to interview? Yeah, and ultimately we were looking for that sort of, are they a good fit for the values? Not are they a good fit for the kind of people, but are they a good fit for the values of the company? Are they going to buy into what we're trying to achieve, really?
Yeah, I think that's key. I've heard that quite a bit. Values-based, behaviour-based interviewing, but values-based interviewing as well seems to be quite a big thing. You said to it, you don't want, I suppose, for the diversity of thought aspect, you don't want a lot of Adrian's in a room or Clem's in a room. Like you said, clones.
What a nightmare! A whole bunch of Clems. Yeah.
You need to move away. You need to move away from that, don't you?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you're getting a company off the ground, of course, it makes it quicker and easier to do it. You know people, you trust them, you've got the relationship. So it's totally natural that lots of companies start like that. But I think once you've got past that initial, okay, we're up and running, being much more considered about who are we hiring, what are they bringing, let's try and get people from different backgrounds, let's try and diversify how we're thinking, considering what that person's going to bring to the organisation is so key if we want that organisation to be successful, and also a great place to work.
Clem, one of the terms that I had heard recently was cultural add rather than a cultural fit, and I suppose that's a good way of ensuring, I suppose, diversity, but it fits in line with what you were saying there about having a diverse panel as well for doing the interviews.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think cultural fit is a bit of a loaded term and can lead to some undesired results, really. It's to me, that speaks to potentially kind of just hiring for people who are like you and who you like when you're interviewing them, which can again then result in kind of groups of people who all look very similar. Cultural add, having, looking at, well, okay, what's that person going to bring to the company? Is that a different view? Is that a different way of thinking? Are they in line with our values, but they're bringing something unique that we don't have? That again is a much more healthy way to approach it. Okay. And that diverse panel, as you say, can kind of help you achieve that. Maybe somebody on the panel will then see something that you don't. Yeah. We all kind of have unconscious biases which are going to play out in those situations. So this kind of having those range of people interviewing is going to really help.
Brilliant. Thanks, Clem. One last thing I was going to ask you. Promise last thing.
Yep.
The academy. We've talked about it in the past over coffee. I know it was very popular at IW and really helped drive the diverse aspect, didn't it? And I know a lot of businesses have, I think it's a graduate scheme, isn't it? If you want to come on the academy or the graduate scheme, you need to have gone to university X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But you guys didn't do that. So can you shed some light on how you structured the academy and the benefits of it, really?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and the last sort of 3 years of my time at Infinity Works, I was director of academy, solely kind of focused on looking after it. So it's a subject close to my heart. But yeah, as you say, we very consciously, certainly in the first couple of years of the academy, we did go to unis, we went to the grad fairs, and we kind of tried to find people to join us that way.
Yeah.
But we realised the academy was an opportunity to kind of really diversify where we were drawing people from. So we actively sought to kind of go out and create links with, for example, boot camp organisations, kind of other ways of other community groups and that kind of thing, who will have a totally different range of people really within them, and to try and provide those people opportunities to come through our academy interviewing process. And we didn't ask for any particular academic qualification at all, to be totally honest. We had a way of looking at people's CVs and then interviewing them to kind of, again, look for that potential, look for the passion for technology, no matter what their background had been beforehand. So we did ask for that they dabbled with code if they were going to be a software engineer. So had they even proved to themselves that they really loved it, that they'd done something to show that, but there was not one specific thing we were looking for. It was just, did that come through in some way?
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, really, we were kind of keen to sort of provide as part of the academy training program. So we taught coding, we taught people sort of skills, as they're known, and leadership. Gave them an opportunity to kind of work in an environment that was kind of simulating what it was like to work in software engineering.
Brilliant. And how long did the academy last for? How long?
So the program is 12 weeks. Ultimately, is what we found was the most effective time period. So first year was probably a couple of weeks and highly disorganized, if I'm honest. It then grew to 4 weeks, and then I think we maybe make a jump to 8, but ultimately we found 12 weeks was an effective time period. Okay. When you think about it, not a long time really for somebody who's right at the start of their career to train, to settle into an organization. So while it might sound long compared to what some companies do, I know, it really paid off in terms of helping them get a great start and introduction to the industry, and also to Infinity Works.
Fantastic. And what sort of backgrounds did people come from for the academy?
Oh, I mean, it was brilliant. I used to love this kind of angle of it. We had just so many interesting people come to interview, but also join us. So yeah, ones that kind of stand out. We had a whole range of people who had come from, say, teaching backgrounds. Yeah. We had people who had been chefs or baristas in the coffee industry. But then ones like people who'd worked. There was a chap who'd worked on the oil rigs.
Fantastic.
There was somebody who worked in kind of charity mine clearance and that sort of thing. Right, there was just a whole range of backgrounds, different life experiences, and all of them bringing kind of that unique perspective of their life and career so far, but then all with a passion for technology and wanting to kind of get stuck in and make something of a career in tech, which is exactly what we were looking for.
Brilliant. It's fantastic. Clem, thank you very much for your time today. I know I've been here a little bit longer than expected, but thanks very much for coming in to join me on Culture Corner. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks, Clem.